Hi and welcome to 5 Frames From. Today I'm talking about the 2011 film Attack the Block, which was written and directed by Joe Cornish. Now this was Joe Cornish's first film, and at the time he was probably better known as one half of Adam and Joe. Attack the Block is a British film. It's a BAFTA winning film, and because it's a British film, as we'd expect, it's a fairly low budget of approximately 8 million. Despite its low budget, it has become fairly successful. It wasn't hugely successful at the box office, but has become a bit of a cult classic, and people have continued to watch this over the years, so it's probably done quite well on DVD sales. It's the film that's really given credit for the career of John Boyega, actually. It's the film that apparently drew attention to his performance and led to his role in Star Wars. Despite this, the film did have mixed reviews at the time, and partly perhaps this is because of its mixture of genres. It's quite ambitious with the genres it tries to cover. So from the poster here we can see the tagline, "Inner City versus Outer Space." So instantly that tells us there's an element of comedy there, but also the science fiction with a reference to outer space, and obviously the image of the kind of stars in the sky and so on. But also it incorporates a sort of social realism. We can kind of tell that from the inner city part of the tagline, but also the location, the backdrop of the tower block, and perhaps the kind of teenagers as well. We also might describe it as a horror film, and I'll go on to talk about that a little more. Others might simply say that a genre label isn't appropriate here, and this is simply a postmodern film with lots of intertextual references, for example. Anyway, because of this number of genres, it wasn't always well received. Some critics sort of saying it wasn't really funny enough, but it also wasn't really scary enough. It was kind of delivering mixed messages, mixed ideas. So the first frame I've chosen is this one of the block. And if we were to apply Propp's theory of narrative to this film, we might argue that the block is the princess, because it is the block that needs saving, needs rescuing from the aliens when they invade. If we were also to apply Todorov, the block is the place that really faces the disruption, the threat from the aliens. The block also is a place that people feel proud of and possessive of. So both the gang and Hi-Hat both describe the block as our block or my block. But of course Hi-Hat sees the block as an opportunity to sell drugs, whereas the gang actually are proud of where they live and what it means. So here we can see the low angle of the block, making it seem, impressive, dominating. And although this is a low budget film, shots like this don't make it feel low budget. It really does feel very cinematic, very beautifully composed. Now Cornish, when you hear him interviewed about Attack the Block, talks about how when he was younger he would often walk through the estates on his way home, and he would often be sort of struck how the buildings and the kind of area around it would often remind him of a sci-fi location, something from a science fiction film. And so I think the top lighting here, these 4 kind of spotlights that shine down the block, add this science fiction effect. Also, because the lighting is limited and appears to come from these natural sources, it does create a number of shadows around the edge of the frame, and of course that creates mystery. It's the perfect location, the perfect timing for an alien invasion, and of course firework night itself is a time when people get up to mischief and can be quite scary. So again, it's the perfect setting for this moment, for this invasion, and a perfect cover for this invasion. Now we can just see, sort of in the middle of the frame, the Union Jack, a flag flying from one of the balconies. And this is important because that flag later on saves Moses. Spoiler alert here, as he gets sort of blown out of the window in trying to get rid of the aliens. He's seen in a shot sort of hanging from the Union Jack, and we could argue that links to this idea of pride and perhaps even patriotism. So maybe there is something to be said there about ethnicity and belonging. And talking of community and belonging, my second shot I've chosen is this two shots of Sam and the old lady who finds her after she's been mugged. Now this is a rear view long shot, and again it's really nicely framed. It's got a sense of balance within the frame with the lighting on either side. Again, the lighting here creating that slightly science fiction effect, a warmer glow here though. But the locations, this one and the block before, really reflecting the sort of social realism genre, that alongside the fact that Sam is mugged in the first place and the sort of language and dialogue used by the gang themselves. Anyway, the fact that Sam is sort of scooped up by this woman suggests the community within the block. Although Sam is a slight outsider, she is a white middle-class woman, therefore she doesn't really understand the sort of prejudices that the gang, the black teenagers, face on a day-to-day basis. So she's a bit of an outsider within the block and needs to be taken care of. Now, the old lady who finds her is sort of a stereotypical representation of age, and of course she's got the prop of the shopping trolley that we can see here. She of course describes the gang as effing monsters, reflecting really a lot of kind of newspaper headlines around that time, and still today we see plenty of stories about teenagers and their sort of antisocial behaviour. So she's kind of echoing the voice of that generation, really. Of course, when the aliens invade, they are the monsters. We realise the teenagers aren't the monsters. And so perhaps Joe Cornish is trying to get us to think about, you know, how we view people, the stereotypes, the way we judge people in the first place. I think it's also worth mentioning here representation of gender. Of course, at this point, Sam has just been mugged, so therefore she is the victim. Before this point, we see her in a number of sort of high angle shots looking down on her as the gang tower above her, and here she is crying, upset. She has been the victim of this mugging, and she's very much weakened. This is interesting for the audience as well, because Sam is the first character that we see, so arguably we're aligned with her. We hear her talking to her mum on the telephone, we hear her talking about her nursing shifts, so we know she's a really good person. She's then attacked by these boys, but then suddenly we find out more about these boys, we find out the boys' stories, and we're also aligned with them, which is very uncomfortable. So it's interesting how this opening of the film really plays with audience expectations and what we think might happen next. So the next shot is this one of Hi-Hat, Moses and Ron in the weed room at the top of the block, and I've chosen this because the image obviously contains a number of stereotypes to do with ethnicity and class. So for example, this successful black man, Hi-Hats, is only successful because he's a drug dealer, he listens to rap music and he wears a gold chain. So it really is fulfilling this stereotype of ethnicity that we see repeated in the media time and time again. This over-the-shoulder shot shows Hi-Hats' influence on Moses. He shows he's the sort of superior character. He's got more power and more money than Moses. And perhaps Moses' facial expression shows slight fear of this character. What I think is really interesting about this scene is how quickly Moses becomes involved in the drug dealing, and Hi-Hat says, "You're my boy now." So even though Moses is very young, we later find out is about 15, he very quickly gets involved in this world of crime. In the background of the shot we can see Nick Frost, who plays Ron, and even though he is not featured in the film a huge amount, he is one of the selling points of the film and did feature on the poster. One of the unique selling points of the film is that it's made by the same production as Shaun of the Dead. So really, you know, this film didn't have a huge amount of stars in there. Nick Frost is the only real star, and so I think he's worth a mention here. Okay, so for my fourth shot, I've chosen this one taken from Tia's flat. This is when the gang will go to visit Tia because she has a gate on her door and it's particularly safe within the block. Now, I've chosen this for a number of reasons because firstly it shows the comedy genre, particularly with this sort of slapstick moment where Moses' enormous sword kind of gets stuck in the wall just before he's able to attack the alien. Of course, we've got the sci-fi element, of course, with the alien itself. And what's interesting about this film, of course, and possibly to be expected because of its low budget nature, is that rather than go for lots of CGI special effects, what we've got here is, sort of older, sort of more traditional effects. So essentially we've got a bloke in a gorilla suit with some animatronic jaws. But the quality of the aliens add to the sort of quirkiness and the fun of the film, actually. And also they provide a number of kind of humorous lines, particularly the way that the boys describe them and also how dark they are. So here we've got this kind of two-shot, it's balanced in a way, Moses and the alien filling either side of the frame. But of course here's Sam. We can't quite see her, but Sam is kind of breaking into the frame and disturbing this balance, and kind of this provides a bit of a turning point, this moment for Sam. She joins with gang. Previous to this point, the girls in the block kind of refer to her as Moses' maths teacher, but here she proves her reliability and her worth to the gang by saving Moses from the alien. Now here we could argue that Sam fulfills Carol Clover's final girl theory, and this is a theory associated with the horror film, so again another generic quality. Now Carol Clover very famously coined the term final girl, and she referred to slasher films when she coined this term. So the final girl is a character that is particularly sort of intelligent and resourceful. Normally they have a unisex name. So in Halloween we have the character Laurie, and in slightly more recent films like Scream we have Sydney. So here Sam has got this name that can be either a girl's name or a boy's name. Also here, Sam uses a knife to kill the alien, and we could argue that this is what Carol Clover calls phallic appropriation. Often our final girls have to use knives or knitting needles or chainsaws. Usually it's the weapon of the murderer. They usually use that weapon against them. Okay, so now we're at my final frame, which is this point of view shot from a high angle as Sam enters Moses' flat. Moses' character has been transformed at this part. He is now the hero, as opposed to this sort of villainous character that we see earlier on. He's the hero, and he's developed this plan which actually puts him in a significant amount of danger, but he's willing to sacrifice himself to protect the block and to protect the people within the block. But once Sam enters the flat, we start to think about how vulnerable Moses is. And this image of the child in the photo frame, presumably Moses when he's a young boy, just goes to show his innocence. And this is the moment where we actually find out how old he is, just 15. So his youth is really highlighted. As Sam looks around the flat, we see empty pizza boxes and an old children's duvet on his bed. So we realise that Moses has been fairly neglected and has basically been bringing himself up for a significant amount of time. So this raises questions about the opportunities that Moses has had, and really we start to think that it's no wonder that he has turned to crime, that it's easy for him to turn to crime when his family is absent. So this really reflects the social realism genre. It shows what life might be like for a young male of this ethnicity and of this class in this part of the world. So I really do think that in terms of representation, this film is trying to challenge us, it's trying to make us think about what we think we know, how we judge people. And Sam, of course, the character that we're initially aligned with, does have a change of heart as well about Moses. And at the very end of the film, we see her protecting Moses, sticking up for Moses as he's taken away from the police. She tells us that Moses is her neighbour and that he rescued her. So by the end of the film, Moses really has been on a hero's journey, to use a Christopher Vogler narrative theory. And at the end, his return with the elixir really is about finding acceptance and finding his self-worth. So even though he's taken away by the police, he knows he's done something good, and he realises he's worth more than he thought he was at the start. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick look at Attack the Block and that you find it useful for your studies. As ever, there's much more you can say about the film, so please feel free to start discussion below. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.